All right, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending where you are in the world. Thank you all for attending today's session. This is session 4 of the Adults with Developmental Disabilities series. Data collection charting the course to fix it by Kevin J. Fitzgerald. Thank you, Kevin, for being here and doing, this is session 4 of the 6-part series. So yes, there are 2 more sessions after this one. And during today's 1-hour webinar, you will have the chance to earn that 1 CEU. If you didn't already purchase, don't worry, you could still go back and do that. It's still available in the store. And it will be overnight as well. So if you decide after the webinar that you want to go in and purchase that CEU, go ahead and do so. And the way that you'll be able to earn that CEU today is by staying the entire duration of the webinar and also answering the poll questions that will be popping up throughout. So as long as you participate and stay the whole time, then you are good to go. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to put them into the questions part of the control panel. I will be taking them periodically, and we will have a great Q&A, especially at the end, so stick around for that afterwards. Also, the handouts for a copy of this presentation in the handouts will be distributed after the webinar today. So just keep that in mind that they will be distributed, and it will be probably tomorrow morning when I review everybody's data. But that's all I have to say for now. So I'm going to shut my camera off and turn it over to Kevin.
All right, thank you, Marissa. Just want to start out again by saying to everybody, I'm humbled and honored to have you in the audience. Seems like I'm developing a bit of a following of people that are coming to all of the topics that we discussed. So I'm very flattered, and obviously from the feedback I've been getting, which has been overwhelmingly positive, I really thank you for that and appreciate that. Today, however, we're talking about what I believe is the Achilles heel. Data collection and data integrity is, in my opinion, the biggest problem that we face. And I'm not just talking about me, I'm talking about all of us. This is such a pervasive problem and such a tough dragon to slay that what I'm going to focus on today is giving you some fundamental ideas and concepts that I utilize in my practice to try to make sure that the data I'm getting is at least remotely accurate. Because this is a very, very serious chronic problem throughout the field. And the reason why this is probably more imperative than anything else that I talk about is if we believe as behavior analysts that data drives the decision-making process, and I believe that wholeheartedly, and I embrace that philosophy and that concept. If the data is flawed, and I'm basing my treatment decisions for that individual who sometimes can't advocate for themselves, if I'm basing all of my decisions about what I think is going to be beneficial for that person based on flawed data, I've got a very, very serious fundamental problem that has to be fixed. And that's exactly why I chose to discuss this topic in some detail today. So let's get into it. My first thought about this has to do with reasonable expectations regarding data. So let's talk about this. Let's take a step back. Is the data that we're asking the staff to collect truly reasonable, doable? Is it a setup to fail? Well, I don't know about you, but I've inherited lots of programs from other clinicians, and I make many mistakes myself, but I have seen some data systems, and I continue to come across them in my practice, that are just incredibly complex, incredibly too detailed. In some cases, they're generic and they're not capturing the spirit of the data. There's many, many problems with data collection across the board as I see it for individuals. So the first question is, and it may seem patently obvious, but I think it bears repeating. What are we asking the staff to collect, and can they actually collect it? We know in this field that we are putting more and more responsibility on direct care staff every day. They have to be med certified in many states. They have to be CPR first aid trained. They have to have data collection on individuals' goals and objectives way beyond the behavior support plan data. There's many, many things that we place on. They have to do hands-on direct care support and assistance with staff virtually throughout the entirety of the day. So After we're done with all of that, we pile on, oh, you got to take data on behaviors too. So exactly how have we set it up? And is it reasonable what we're asking the staff to do? Because if it isn't, we need to take a step back and look at that. So, and I do that. In my practice, I'm always trying to figure out, am I setting them up to fail? Because that's certainly not what I want to do. Are the definitions for identified target behaviors to both increase and decrease concise and clear enough to ensure that data is being collected and maintained on what we actually want to measure? So we've all learned through all of our behavior analytic coursework and all the rest of the stuff that we've done, not only education-wise, but in practice, that our operational definitions of target behaviors have to be succinct, precise, observable, measurable. We know that. It's kind of like it's ingrained in us. Well, I'll tell you, I see a lot of behavior support plans where those definitions are they're very kind of open-ended. They're a little vague. One staff could interpret it this way, another staff could interpret it that way. So if you think about that right off the bat, just based on the definitions of target behaviors, we're building in the probability that the data is going to become inaccurate because the staff aren't going to have a consistent expectation of whether or not that criteria regarding that definition, whether it's been met or not. So I would argue, not only for me, I have to constantly remind myself, let me go back and look at the definitions and make sure they're clean, they're observable, they're relatively simple, hopefully. The more complicated, the more you're building in that artifact of failure for people to misconstrue whether it is or it isn't. So that's another simple but relevant point I want to make. Have we made the data collection system as user-friendly as it can possibly be? This kind of goes back to the first point, is the way the data system set up, is it something the staff can actually do? Is it reasonable? Is it doable? Again, getting back to the first point. Point number 4, I think we oftentimes overlook this. I try not to. I've learned from a lot of lumps along the way. Have we explained to staff the importance and relevancy of what and why we're asking them to collect and maintain requested data? Do they truly understand its purpose? Many of the situations I get involved with, the answer to that question, very unfortunately, is no. No. So if you're asking me to take data on top of all of the other things you're asking me to do, if I'm a direct care staff and I have no idea what you need this data for, what you're going to do with it, why it's important, why it's relevant, why is it going to be helpful to the person I'm supporting? If I don't know any of that, guess what? The probability of my taking data goes down dramatically. So let's give people a fair and reasonable explanation. We don't have to write a book, but people need to know why we're asking them to do what we're asking them to do and how incredibly important it is and why we're going to use that data to measure if people are making progress, to take the psychiatric appointments, to adjust the behavior support plan. For a multitude of reasons, we're going to be using that data in very important, relevant ways, and the staff need to be made aware of that. They're not just going to do it because we tell them to do it. And if you think they are, you're sadly mistaken. The staff have the ability, given all of their other responsibilities, to make data entries in reasonable proximity temporally to when they have been observed or witnessed. I don't know about you, but I have a lot of situations where staff have 5 minutes at the end of their shift before they leave for the incoming shift in a 24-hour staff community-based residence to do all the data documentation for their 8-hour shift. Are you kidding me? So in that 5 minutes, I'm supposed to have the recollection of could be dozens, if not hundreds of data points, depending upon how the data is set up and what we're trying to capture, that happened during the entirety of the 8 hours. I've got all this other documentation for all these other things I need to be putting into place prior to my departure for the end of my shift for that day. So we need to be honest and take a look at what we're asking people. Do they have an adequate amount of time? Are there opportunities to take data during the normal, natural course of the day so that they don't have to wait until the very end, which compromises, again, principle of reinforcement effectiveness, the immediacy of the documentation improves the accuracy of the documentation. So if you're waiting, probably the information is going to be compromised. And that's another unfortunate reality. Let's talk about the methodology. I'm just going to check the time. So now we talked a little bit about some of the fundamental underlying problems that we need to be aware of. And this may sound very simple to most of you. I told you, I'm Mr. Parsimonious. I'm a simple guy. But I find when I start to have difficulties, I have to go back to what the simple stuff is because I've strayed too far. And that's usually where I end up getting caught up in the weeds. How have we determined what the optimal method of data collection should be? Is it person and situation specific? Well, many times it's not. I'm personally not a fan of generic data collection systems because they don't typically take into account individual differences. Now, please, I am not saying that there aren't some generic, very user-friendly, adequate data sheets out there, because there's tons of them that are appropriate for our circumstances. I'm not saying that. But I'm not a one-size-fits-all kind of guy. I want to know what the person is doing, what the frequency is, what the intensity is, how severe the target behaviors are. And then based on all of those questions and a whole lot more that I'm not going to take the time to get into right now, I'm going to develop my data sheet to capture data that's relevant, that's useful, that I can actually analyze, and that staff, most important of anything, can hopefully take and maintain with some integrity. That's just how I operate. Other than simple frequency counts, which are inherently flawed, some of you have heard me talk about this in some of my other webinars. Doing an absolute continuous measurement frequency counts is virtually impossible. People spend time in their rooms. You can't document what you don't see, what you don't hear, what you don't know is occurring, right? Pretty obvious. If people aren't in line of sight and they're engaging in a target behavior that doesn't make noise, and they're not in direct view, how do I know if they're doing it? The answer is I don't. I'm speculating, it's conjecture. We don't want that. We want to be more scientific as much as we can be, correct? That's the whole idea of the field. So these frequency counts, again, I think are a little bit of a, I think we over rely on frequency counts, particularly high frequency behavior that you can't accurately count anyway. Have we considered, or would it be appropriate to utilize a latency measure, interval spoilage, intensity measure, duration measure? So again, let's just make sure when we're asking staff to collect data on whatever it is specific to the individual, whether or not a frequency count is really what we're ultimately looking for. And how many times have I walked into residences where the frequency count is an hour by hour check mark in a box? If a person engages in SIB between 8 and 9 a.m., put a check in the box. So I go in there and they put a check in the box. Well, an hour? An hour? So did they do it once? Did they do it 500 times? How intense was it? What are we actually capturing when we do that? I would argue it's not particularly relevant or useful to me, because I don't think that's the right way to capture that kind of data. That's just me. This is something I've really started to do a lot of lately, and I'm really liking it, which is making people accountable for taking their own data. One less responsibility for the staff, not that the staff don't need to document on their own, but self-monitoring is a very effective tool for a lot of our folks that are capable of doing it, and many people can be taught how to do it. And we have to reinforce them, obviously, for doing it. If you ask me to self-monitor whether or not everything I eat during the course of the day is what my doctor would insist is healthy and appropriate for me, I'm probably going to fudge some of my own data. Well, people do that too, because when they're reporting on things that they think they shouldn't be doing or that we think we're going to ostracize them for, they tend to underreport that or say, no, I didn't do that, even though they did, just like we do. So if there's ways of putting these systems in place, I have one recently that I developed where even if the person has lots of behavioral difficulties during the day, as long as they're being honest in their self-reporting so that they're sharing that data with staff at the end of the day, and the staff are saying, yep, that's an accurate reflection of that person's day, I'm awarding that person bonus points for being honest, for their awareness of documenting things in a correct and accurate way. I think that's something we need to do more. As I'm saying here, be aware that regular reviews of self-maintained data need to be conducted. It's just like us, supported persons are not always 100% honest or accurate. Right? So we don't always tell the truth to people about what we do when we self-monitor our own behavior, and neither did the people we support. I figured that out a long time ago. So there's ways to kind of counter that or be aware of that so that we're not reinforcing a person that had globally a really difficult day, just because they're coming forward and saying, hey, I had a great day. I earned my whatever. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. I got documentation here that says this is some of the stuff that happened in the morning, but you did really good in the afternoon. I see that. That's great, because we always want to reinforce the positive, right? But yet, in the afternoon, I see you had a little bit of trouble too. But tomorrow's another day. Well, I had a perfect day. What do you mean? So this is a good way, if you set it up properly, to get people to take more accountability for their own behavior, which is something I think we all need to do. That includes all of society. So self-monitoring, I think, is something that we really need to do more. And the final point here before the first poll question: do staff understand that documenting the absence of a behavior is just as important as documenting the occurrence of a behavior? Again, I told you, Mr. Parsimony. How many data sheets have I seen in my 35-year career where most of the data sheet was blank? Well, if I had a quarter for every one of them, I could probably retire tomorrow. That's how many I've seen. What the heck does that mean? What does a blank data sheet mean? Well, it depends on who you ask. If you ask the staff, and again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to the staff. Those of you that have followed me know that nobody respects, appreciates, and acknowledges direct care staff in what they do with our folks for what they get paid more than this guy. So I'm not saying this to be disrespectful to our staff. I just want to acknowledge what is, honestly. The staff is going to tell you, oh, if there's nothing documented, then nothing happened. I don't believe it. I cannot make that leap of faith. I gave that up many, many years ago, decades ago. So I've always taught, as I'm sure you have, and if you haven't, I would strongly recommend that you do, that if you're monitoring behavior on some kind of a data sheet that's reasonable and well-developed and doable for not only the staff, but for the clinician to be able to interpret and analyze, always document with a 0, put your initials in there. Do not leave it blank, because a blank to me does not mean it didn't occur. It means you didn't take any data. It could mean that it didn't occur, but I want you to document the fact that you were aware of it, that it did not occur, and I want you to memorialize that some way so that I have a level of comfort when I'm looking at the data, that that's exactly what I'm looking at when I'm looking at that data sheet. Let's go to poll question 1, Marissa, and I'm going to take a sip of Diet Coke.
Okay. All right, everybody. So, true or false, staff will be more likely to maintain consistent, accurate data if they understand why they're being asked to do it. Now, if you haven't attended either any of our previous sessions in this series or any previous webinars with us before, then this is what the poll questions look like. If you have attended, then you know exactly what to do. Just put your answer right into the interface, the multiple choice interface. And then if you have any trouble with that interface, you can put your answers in either a Word document or the body of an email, and that will perfectly suffice for your participation. Just if you need those that CEU credit, just make sure that you answer these poll questions to qualify. Alrighty, so I am going to shut this out in 3, 2, and 1. It looks like 99% said true and 1% said false.
Well, thank God for the 99%, because the obvious answer is true. If staff do not understand at some fundamental, simple, reasonable level why they're being asked to take data, the probability of them taking data goes down, in my opinion, dramatically. So the answer is true. That's a good response. Let's get in. Any questions right now? I know Marissa said we're going to have questions and answers at the end, and I expect today there's going to be some difficult ones because, as I said, data collection, this is the Achilles heel. Are there any questions that people have posed right now? A couple that I might be able to take because I'm looking at the clock and I'm in decent shape.
All right, so let's see. We got some feedback too. Yes, it's hard to find webinars that are related to adults with DD, and all of the past webinars have been great. Oh, thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
And Tanya says, Thank you for talking about making reasonable expectation when talking about data collection. Sometimes we know what we want, but don't take into account all the other variables that that may affect accurate data collection.
Yeah, that's a great point. Let me just say this and then I'll move on. But here's what I've learned about human services and supporting people with developmental disabilities, which I've been privileged and honored to do for close to 35 years now, working on 36 actually. There's an interdependency in the supports that we provide to our people. Nobody does whatever they do in supporting people with developmental disabilities autonomously or independently. That's not how this works. So if you don't understand all of the working parts and all the different expectations and obligations, and the person that made that comment is spot on, we can approach it very myopically. We don't care about all that other crap, right? That's not our responsibility. I just want my behavioral data. Well, that's fine, but you're a bit delusional, because if you don't understand all the other stuff that we're asking staff to be able to maintain and take data on, many times, which the agency considers to be far more important and relevant than the behavioral data that we so desperately want, right? So you have to understand the whole. Well, who was it? Gestalt that said the whole is greater than the sum of its parts? Yeah, I think that was Gestalt. But I don't know why. That was in my intro to psych class back in the 70s. So I think we need to think that same way. We need to be aware of that. Let's talk about the methodology for a minute. How have we determined what the optimal method of data collect? I'm sorry, I already went over that. I've got to go to the next slide. I had a bit of a dementia moment there. Feedback. How often are we sharing the information with staff? Really think about this, probe this question regarding the analysis of data we are conducting and what it shows reflects. So all of this data that we're asking staff to collect, that are ultimately and primarily responsible for it, what are we doing with it as far as sharing that information with staff? Oftentimes the answer is not a whole lot. We certainly give it to the bureaucrats, we give it to the administrators, we make sure the funding source has it. But as far as actually sharing that information with staff, oftentimes we don't do it. That's a shame. Because again, if we can share this information with staff and it reflects positive growth and improvement, which I'm going to talk about in more detail in a minute, the probability, the likelihood, the motivation for staff to continue to take data based on the results of that data go up dramatically. Dramatically. So, and the same is true, by the way, if data isn't going in a positive direction. I share that with staff too. So and so isn't doing well. Do we have any idea why? What can we do better? It's not always, positive and roses and rainbows and sunshine. We know that. But it's very important to share how people are doing, particularly when what the staff are doing is making a positive difference, which it oftentimes is, with the people that are responsible for that, which is the direct care staff. One of the things I've done in the past, I don't do it enough, I've gotten away from it, but I'm reminding myself, by doing this webinar today for you, I'm reminding myself of what I need to do more. And what I need to start doing more of is point number 2. Consider posting positive data results graphs and providing that visual and verbal feedback to both staff and supported individuals. This can become a regular, albeit brief, agenda item at staff meetings. This can be a very powerful and effective tool. Now, I'm going to give you 2 quick examples of things that I did many years ago that I was thinking about the other day in preparation for this webinar. Feedback, because staff oftentimes, if you ask staff, how are people doing? Yeah, usually the answer is they're doing about the same. That's the generic answer. Are they doing better? Are they doing worse? Well, that's supposed to be based on the data, right? So I had one individual many years ago that I took out of the Mansfield Training School in Connecticut. He moved into a community residence, profoundly intellectually disabled woman. And one of the things she would do, I don't know why, she'd go in the refrigerator, which she'd never had access to before, right? Because she'd been institutionalized her whole life. She would go in there and drink the milk, the juice. She didn't drink it, she inhaled it. So, right away, I'm like, oh my God, we got to lock up the fridge. Well, you don't want to be doing that. So I won't go into detail because I don't have the time. Suffice it to say, I put in a couple of procedures. I put fluids for her with a picture of her on the fluids in smaller containers in the fridge. And I taught her to access those items because they were exclusively there for her, and she was able to recognize her own image on the container, even in spite of her profound intellectual disability. My point is this: I think when she came to us, she was drinking a quart of fluid. I'm guessing from memory, probably about 30 seconds. I'm not making that up. And after working with her for a couple of months, I remember going to a staff meeting, and I said, her name was Peggy. I'm not violating anything there. That's the only name I'm going to give you. No more details. I said, how's Peggy doing? I said, terrible. She's going in the fridge. She's drinking just as fast. Well, you know what? I actually had data from the staff that I thought was quite highly reliable. That instead of taking her 30 seconds to drink a quart of fluid, it was now taking her about a minute and a half. A threefold increase in the amount of time it took her to drink a quart. Now, you and I, who cares? It's still way too damn quick, right? No, that's progress. That's progress. But if you're in the war zone, working with her every day, you don't appreciate that progress because it still feels like it's the same as it was. So when I shared that information with the staff, and I actually put a graph on the refrigerator that showed she'd gone from 30 seconds, and the trend line was like, whoa, a threefold increase in how long it takes you to ingest a quart of fluid. This is awesome. It changed the whole attitude and demeanor of the staff. It made them feel like, okay, this is working. We are making a difference. So I'm giving you that example because let's not forget to do that. I had another person, again, I'll only take a second, similar situation. This is probably 10 years ago. A woman, very high functioning woman, living in a residence, maybe borderline intellectual disability, if that. But she also had a borderline personality disorder. So one of the antecedents to a lot of her target behaviors I noticed was the volume of her voice. She'd get loud and louder and louder. And even at baseline, her voice volume was borderline yelling. I'm not going to lie. So since I had identified that as an antecedent to more significant target behaviors, I actually went out on Amazon. I bought a decibel meter for like $50. And I did a baseline with the decibel meter of how loud her conversational baseline voice was. And it was maybe 90 decibels, which was too high because we wanted to get that down because we knew that when she was operating at that level, the bigger target behaviors were only a few moments away. Over time, I eventually taught her, again, I can't get into the details, how to lower her voice and do better self-modulation and regulation of her own voice. So I got it down to maybe 70 decibels instead of 90. Again, when I went back to the staff and I said to them, how's she doing? Oh, she's still yelling. It hasn't changed. It's as loud as it's ever been. I actually was able to show them with the data, objective data, unbiased data, technologically generated data, that her decibel level had gone down by almost 25%. And they were like, really? I said, really? You guys are doing a great job. Again, it changes the whole demeanor, the whole atmosphere. And it really motivates staff because they realize that they are making a difference when situations might not be that patently obvious that things are actually going in a positive direction. And the last thing I'll say, because I've deviated a bit, remember that behavioral change oftentimes happens very slowly, very incrementally. Incrementally is a word I use a lot. People don't usually just change their behavior. If a person's been doing something for 20 years and you put a plan in place and you have this delusional expectation that they're going to suddenly stop doing it, you're probably going to be disappointed. So I've learned that be patient, capture what I can capture data-wise, monitor it, and it might take me a while to get to the end point of whatever goal or objective I have for that person, and hopefully they have for themselves. But patience is a virtue, and doing things incrementally and gradually that oftentimes is not captured by staff that work with the person every day is a very important and relevant bit of information to share with them. I think we should do a lot more of that, including myself. In fact, Now I'm going to do more of it starting tomorrow because I'm reminding myself that I haven't done this kind of stuff. Similarly, if there are significant problems or issues regarding requested data collection, which is almost inevitable, this canon should also be raised and discussed at staff meeting. Well, pandemic be damned. For the last year and almost a half, many residences haven't had staff meetings. Many residences have had staff meetings virtually. Many residences have had staff meetings that nobody attended. Why? Because we have no freaking staff. Because everybody's, well, I'm not gonna say anything that's politically incorrect. Lots of our people have quit because we put a lot of demands and expectations on them. We had to. You can't support people if you don't have people to support them. I haven't figured out a way to do that. We don't have a robot yet that can fill in for direct care personnel. Nobody is more important than them, and they've been in very short supply. So, and we've treated them harshly over the pandemic because we have certain minimal ratios we have to maintain just to provide health and safety oversight and stay in business. So it's been a hell of a year and a half in human services, hasn't it? I think we'd all agree. But again, now that we're getting back to normal, or so they tell me, we're starting to have staff meetings. So now let's share the data. What's working? What isn't working? This is what the data tells me. Very important. Reiterate and remind staff how imperative it is that data be collected, and the fact that all of us use data literally hundreds of times each day to make decisions. So at least once a month, I get to do training with direct care staff in positive behavior supports, which I'm a great believer in. As I've told some of you before, I've been around for some of these other webinars. Part of my job during that training is to explain to them why it is so imperative that we have accurate, reliable data for the people we support. And some of them, as I try to explain how we use this information, I can tell it's getting a little bit over their head. Again, I'm saying that in the most respectful way possible. So here's what I've said to them. This has really worked well. One day I was talking about data and numbers and things like that, and staff were kind of like, "Yeah, we don't really get it. We don't understand why is it." And this was my spontaneous response to them. I said, "Okay, over the last year, haven't you had to take the temperatures of everybody that walked into the house? Hasn't that been part of the protocol?" They said, "Yep." I said, "Okay, so I'm walking into your house, and you pull out the old trusty thermometer, digital, or you do the forehead scan or whatever the hell you do, and you take my temperature, 98.6. And I fill out the COVID checklist. I don't have any symptoms. You let me in, right?" They said, "Yeah, right." I said, "Okay, put that aside for a minute. Same person, same situation. I walk into the house, you pull out the old trusty thermoscan, comes back 102.7. What's your response to that?" And they're like, if you had a fever or a temp or spike, it could be a symptom of COVID. We can't let you in." I said, exactly. So something as basic and simple as that can profoundly affect the outcome of your interpretation of the data, as well as how you respond to the data. And then they get it. And they go, "Yeah, I never thought of it that way." Well, that's why I gave you that example. Let's do poll question number 2.
Okay, everyone. So, providing visual and verbal feedback to staff regarding the data they are being asked to maintain is necessary and ineffective. True or false?
Hold on, you misread that. Is unnecessary and ineffective.
I didn't say that. I'm sorry.
You said necessary and effective.
I apologize.
No problem. That's how I heard it anyway.
And ineffective. True or false? All right, everyone is getting their votes in very, very quickly. So I am going to turn this down in 3, 2, and 1. Awesome. It looks like 3% said true and 97% said false.
So the question is false. I just spent quite a bit of time in going into detail how imperative it is that we share the feedback with staff, either verbally, visually, whatever way we can, to motivate them to continue to take accurate, reliable data. All right, so here's an idea I've had for many years, which I personally think is a great idea. The problem is every time I tell people to do it, they rarely do it. But I still think it's a great idea, so I'm going to share it with you. And maybe you can get some of your people to do it. Maybe you can have better luck than me. I don't know. Let's talk about data integrity checks. The first point I'm going to make about this is this, and this is on all of us, guys. I'm in there with you. I'm in the trenches. It is incumbent upon us as professionals to question the data if we have reason to believe it is not accurate or reliable. I can't tell you how many people I deal with each and every day. I go, do you have data? They go, yep, thank God I got data. I go, that's great. Can I take a look at it? Well, no, I got data. Well, can I see what it? Nah, no. Trust me, I got data. Well, that's obviously a person that's not real confident in the veracity, the integrity of the data, of the accuracy of it, because they don't even want me to look at it. That's right away. I'm like, oh, they got data, but I don't think it's good data. And there's a lot of bad data out there, folks. God knows that. So, speaking for myself and all of us in the field, do not accept data simply because someone provides you with numbers. If it doesn't feel right or look right, we must question what is provided to us. This is probably the single biggest problem in the field. We've already said that collecting accurate, reliable data is a huge problem. But this is where we have to be the keepers of the gate. And you don't want to hear that, and I don't even like to say it, because I understand that this is a tough nut to crack. This is a complicated problem with many layers, many of which we can't directly control, right? But we can never turn a blind eye to data that we don't think is accurate. It's unethical, in my opinion. It's immoral. It's just not right. If we're here to support the people that we're privileged to support, and we believe the data drives the decision-making process, and we don't question data that we know our gut is telling us is inherently flawed, then shame on all of us, including me. So this is a big problem for me. I get into it all the time with people about this very, very topic, and I'm sure many of you have had the same kind of battles. And we must continue to insist that it get better, because the way we're doing it now is not okay, in my opinion. Someone in a supervisory, this is what I call a data integrity check. Someone in a supervisory management position should conduct daily integrity checks. If this is done, we can fix inaccurate or missing data before it becomes a runaway train. So what is the problem with data? Well, one of the problems, do we have a couple of days? I could spontaneously fill a couple of days with what the problems with data are. But part of the problem with data is if we don't have it, if we haven't captured anything, we oftentimes don't find that out for days, maybe even a week, maybe weeks, and God forbid, maybe even months. What do we do then? Punt. Because at that point, we're pretty much screwed. Because if data has gone uncollected for that period of time, there's no way to go back and recreate with any accuracy or reliability, in my opinion, all of that data. No one remembers what happened last week, last month. It's impossible. So one of the things I've proposed in a number of agencies, which most of them don't do, but I keep telling them to do it anyway, so I'm going to stop me, is maybe having the third shift or overnight staff be used in a more productive manner as it relates to monitoring, tracking, or ensuring that data is and has been collected and entered. So I'm always looking at, everybody's overwhelmed, everybody's got too many responsibilities. Data collection is a chronic, pervasive problem throughout the field. It's not unique to me. You all know what I'm talking about. How can we fix it? Well, one of the ways we can fix it is by looking at the resources that we have, as overwhelmed as they might feel like they are, and see if we have any wiggle room in staff being able to contribute to the process of ensuring that we have data in a more timely, reliable manner. And one idea that I have in some houses is to use a third shift staff person to have that be part of their responsibility. Had them look through the data that was supposed to be collected for all the individuals they support. Most residences are 3 or 4 people, including behavioral data. While this is assuming that they're an awake person, of course, they can't do it in their sleep, but most sleep positions have been eliminated. Most people in 24-hour staff residences are awake during the overnight, or at least they're supposed to be. little humor there. So can we have them participate in this process? I would argue yes. If everybody in the house has a reasonably good sleep pattern, maybe they get up once during the night to get a drink or use the bathroom. But if everybody is sleeping relatively soundly for that 8-hour shift, or from approximately, say, 9 or 10 p.m. until 5 or 6 a.m., most agencies have the staff on third shift prepare lunches for the next day. I would argue the people should be doing that, but that's a discussion for another day. A lot of agencies view their third shift staff as glorified custodians. Mop the floor, wipe the tables. I'm not saying that cleanliness isn't important. Please don't misconstrue what I'm saying. But that doesn't take 8 hours. So maybe part of their responsibilities can be looking at the data and ensuring that it's at least there for the duration of that day. Because you know what? If it isn't there, we can go back and fix it. And we can probably fix it accurately, because it's only been that day that we haven't captured the data. Just a thought. I oftentimes suggest that the residential manager start their day by quickly reviewing data and documentation from the previous day. Again, I tell people to do this, but many don't. Let me just put it that way. I'm not trying to be too pessimistic or negative here, but most don't do what I'm telling them to do. So a manager goes in, they immediately know what data was supposed to be collected for those individuals for the previous day. They immediately do 10, 15 minutes I'm talking about. That's all. 10 or 15 minutes, they quickly review that all of the documentation that was supposed to be done for that individual, including the behavioral documentation, has in fact been done for the previous day. Check. Good, you did. Now, obviously, if they see anything that looks inaccurate or erroneous, or a misentry, or just blatantly didn't happen or couldn't have happened, then that gives them an opportunity to fix it as well. I have no problem people fixing false data or inaccurate data, because a lot of our data is flawed. So go back and fix it, make it right. But you can't do that a month later. You see, that's where the problem lies. So if we're not on top of this in a reasonably timely manner, then we're in the weeds. So for the manager, if the data looks inaccurate, question or clarify it. If the data is missing, make the staff person responsible for collecting it, fix it. Just my thoughts on ways that we can keep a tab on our data with a little bit more confidence and competence than we typically do. 1:45. Do we have any questions, Marissa, that you can throw at me?
Oh yeah, we do have quite a few questions. Let's see. So, do you do social validity checks with the staff to check feedback from the staff on their ability to collect the data, and the operational definition is clear and easy to measure?
I generally don't. I think it's a great idea. Like all of you, if I could, I would. No, I don't. I can tell you this, and I'm just being honest with you. In most agencies, I say a new staff person comes in the door. If I have 2.5 hours to spend time with that staff person as part of their training curriculum, which can take 2 weeks, 80 hours, full-time training, if I get a couple hours, I consider myself lucky. So what I tend to focus on, not that isn't what social validity is exceptionally relevant. I try to spend time on the importance of taking data. I spend time on the principles and practices of positive behavior supports. Treat our people with respect and dignity. People's rights, don't violate the rights. I spend a lot of time on that. Data collection, as much as I can impart to them how important this is. and use those examples like the thermometer. I try to teach them very basics of positive reinforcement, what we should be providing for our people in the way of reinforcing pro-social, adaptive, responsible behavior. And what I just said pretty much fills 2 hours when I get into it and expand upon it a little bit. But it's a good question, and I wish I had more time to be able to do social validity and explain those concepts, but quite honestly, I don't.
Awesome. So, do you have any strategies for an individual who completes self-monitoring only for the time periods where problem behaviors do not occur?
Oh, that's interesting. I'd like to know more about that person and that person's situation. So one of the things I always say, and those of you that are listening, have attended some of my other webinars, I always say, if you have a situation, a specific situation that you'd like me to give you some advice on or just give you some feedback on, I can't necessarily take the time to do that here. Absolutely contact me, and we can get into a deeper dive about, that's an interesting concept. So that makes sense. A person is this is kind of gets back to the point I made about self-monitoring. I had a great day. I cleaned the dishes. I was appropriately respectful to staff and peers. I did all of my daily chores, because all of those are the alternative functional equivalent replacement behaviors that you want to reinforce and motivate people to do. And then at the bottom of the list is, was I physically assaultive or aggressive today? And they punch somebody in the face. Nope, didn't do that. Did I engage in any property destruction today? No, I flipped over the dining room chair and broke off one of the legs, but no, that's interesting. But again, that gets back into the concept of holding people accountable for taking accurate data. Yeah, I only want to document the good things I do. How about you? Do I want to document the things I do that probably aren't the best for me to do? No, same is true for the people. So it's an interesting point. Please get in touch with me after the webinar via my website, my email. Be more than happy to get into that with you. Any other questions?
Yeah, there are quite a few. I'm not sure if you want to start Q&A
I'm
now.
just going to take one more, and then we're going to hold the rest for the half hour.
Sure. Okay. So let's see. Any suggestions for self-monitoring early learners? I'm working with a 5-year-old who has done some inappropriate vocalizations and self-stimulatory behavior. I've been thinking that a self-monitoring system may help him understand when to do these things and when not to, but I want it to be simple enough for him to understand.
I have some ideas, but again, that's a response for me that I'll be happy to give outside of this forum in more detail. And I'll probably have a couple of more specific questions to ask before I'm comfortable responding. I've always got ideas, guys. You know, I'm a pretty creative clinician, to be honest with you. Some of the most outrageous things I've ever thought of from a behavioral perspective are the ones that actually work the best. And when I first came up with them, people thought I was nuts, including myself, but sometimes they actually work. So let's get into the last part of today's webinar because we have 10 minutes. Reinforcement for staff. What a novel concept. What a novel idea. Why don't our staff do everything we want them to do? We treat them so well. We pay them so well. We're so appreciative on a regular basis and relay that to them. Why should they ever want for anything? And yes, my sarcasm is intended, because we don't do this. Generally speaking, we don't do this. So, first point, why would or should our staff be motivated or compelled to take accurate and reliable behavioral data when they have numerous other job responsibilities and expectations? We talked about this. This has been kind of the crux of today's webinar. Are they going to do it because we tell them it's part of their job? Well, good luck with that. If that's all you got, you're in trouble. So here's some ideas. Strongly suggest the development of a reinforcement or reward system whereby staff can receive some type of incentive, recognition, appreciation, and acknowledgement for maintaining accurate and reliable data. How's that for a thought? We actually put the spotlight right on the data where it clearly belongs, but we really don't want to spotlight for lots of reasons. So why don't we do that and develop a system to reinforce? We reinforce the hell out of our folks each and every day for all the appropriate, adaptive, pro-social, responsible behaviors we want them and expect them to engage in. But we don't do the same when it comes to our staff relative to their taking data. They're supposed to do it because we tell them to do it. Like I said, it doesn't work that way. Here's my idea. I have had some success, again, in putting this information for the webinar. It's more therapeutic for me, trust me, than it is helpful for you, because it reminds me of the things that I've gotten away from, that I need to get back to, rather than make excuses that I'm too busy or I've got too much going on or I've got too many people on my caseload. No. If that's a reality, then I need to thin my caseload and start providing better services to the people that are still on my caseload, because that doesn't work for me as a clinician. I owe these people my very best effort. That's why I do what I do. So I've had some success with developing both independent and interdependent group contingencies, whereby residential staff receive some type of incentive or acknowledgement. So if an agency has 10 residences, as an example, let's put together a little competition. Who takes the best data? How are we going to measure that? How are we going to judge that? Let's come up with some parameters. Let's educate the staff about what they are, and let's give them some real incentive and reinforcement for being the winner. Nothing wrong with a little competition. I'm a pretty competitive guy. You know, you can give everybody a trophy, but you know, I want to win the darn trophy. So that's just how I am. Sorry. So let's assume that the staff want something over and above their paycheck. Maybe the agency hosts this pizza party. Maybe that residents and all those staff get highlighted on the agency's website. Maybe they get some kind. Maybe in some agencies now the gas is starting to go up again. I'll give you each of the staff in the house a gas card for $50 for being the residents of the month when it comes to data collection. You can get a lot of mileage out of doing something like that if you've never tried it. A healthy competition. How's it start? Hey, wait a minute. What's your data look like? I don't know. We missed a couple of things yesterday. How are you doing? No, we're fine. We got everything under control. And obviously, there has to be some checks and balances here, because everyone will come forward if they're their own judges. They're going to tell you everything's hunky dory at the end of the month. But again, there's ways to monitor that. So that's something I think we should really think about doing more of. This can actually develop into a healthy competition when you pit the residences against one another. So again, a reward, recognition, incentive, motivation system that's potent, that's been developed specifically for staff as far as maintaining accurate, timely, reliable behavioral data. And it could be just data on a broader base, but for the sake of our discussion today, I'm focusing on the behavioral data, psychiatric symptom data, or something that's in our purview. All right, time for poll question number 3.
All right, everybody. So, most agencies have comprehensive systems in place to positively reinforce staff for maintaining consistent and accurate data. True or false? Wow, you guys are voting very, very quickly. So I am going to shut this down in 3, 2, and 1. Awesome. It looks like 6% said true and 94% said false.
Yeah, it's false. Now, granted, the 6% that said true might be working in an agency. It would be a bit of an aberration, I'm not going to lie, where they have that in place. But my experience, which is pretty extensive at this point, is that most agencies do not have a system. They're very good at reprimanding staff. Like I said before, for some of you that attended the other webinars, what's wrong with the way we treat our staff? Most agencies discipline. You did this wrong, it's a verbal. You did this wrong again, it's a written. If you do it wrong a third time, we might have to terminate you. Oh, hold on a minute. We can't terminate you because we got nobody to replace you. So you can do whatever the heck it is you're doing, because your job is safe forever, because we're down staff and we need staff desperately. So there are no expectations anymore. Again, sarcasm intended, because that actually is happening. So people need to be held accountable, but not in a disciplinary, punitive kind of way. Doesn't motivate our staff, makes them angry. These days, in human services, you know what happens if you make a staff person angry and you don't respect them and you don't acknowledge them and you don't reinforce them? They say, okay, I'm out of here. I'll go somewhere else where I'm appreciated. And they do. That's all I got for today. We covered a lot, I think. I hope this has been helpful. We're going to stick around for questions and answers for at least the next half hour, maybe longer. As always, I very much appreciate your attendance and your attention. And thank you for coming. And we have 2 other webinars, just to remind you, in the series. I think you'll find the one on functional behavior assessments in July quite interesting. Not just going through the motions. We know what that means. And then last but not least, the one on direct care support professionals in August. How do we retain people? How do we reinforce our staff? How do we do a better job of appreciating and acknowledging them in these desperate times of staffing? A very important and relevant topic. So thank you for your time and attention again. And I'll stick around for questions and answers for at least the next half hour. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. And thank you, Kevin, for doing this with us. As Kevin said, yes, there are 2 more sessions in this series. So please feel free to also get your CEU credit for today's session. And you'll see that the other remaining session 5 and 6 are still listed in the store as well. So go ahead and register or purchase a CEU seat for that. So before we get to the questions and answers, I just have a few things to blurb out for anybody earning CEUs that is not going to stay for the Q&A part. I will have the data analyzed tomorrow morning, and you will have your CEU instructions for your certificates by lunchtime tomorrow. So just keep that in mind. And thank you, everybody who has stayed thus far. And now I'm just going to shoot over to the Q&A. And we will just continue until it's over. All right, so I completely understand what you're saying, and I agree 100% with what you're saying. What I'm struggling with is how the DSPs can manage taking data on all 4 clients in the same home every day.
Well, how? The question is, this gets back to what we started out talking about today. Have we made the data collection as simple and doable and user-friendly for the staff as possible? Because we all acknowledge, and you acknowledge by the question, that we're asking our staff to take data on a copious amount of information. I have agencies and staff that I believe, and not a lot of them, that I believe do take accurate, reliable data. But it's a very carefully orchestrated. I'll even, I have some houses I'm holding up for those of you that are still here. You remember these old-fashioned clickers? If you're counting behaviors and you can't make a data entry till the end of the day, you can get these 4 for $10 on Amazon. Although I think I may have bought them all. You just click. So this actually hooks onto your belt, $2.50. Are you kidding me? So a person exhibits a target behavior that I'm aware I should be acknowledging or taking a documentation on, and I hit the click and I've captured it, and I have a running total that I can utilize at the end of the day. That's one example of many. I think generally what we ask our support staff to do is excessive and overwhelming. So our job, again, data is critical. Data is the linchpin of everything. How can we orchestrate it? How can we structure it? How can we capture it in a way that makes it doable for the staff? So I don't have if that person wants to communicate with me outside of this webinar, doesn't cost you anything, it's free, and give me the details of what the issues are regarding data collection, I might be able to give you some ideas about potentially how to make it better. I'll be happy to do that. But I would need to know the details. I'm a detail kind of guy.
Alrighty. So I've switched from doing frequency data, which was almost always inaccurate, to having them fill out an ABC sheet, ABC data sheet, when a challenging behavior occurs, as opposed to frequent tallies. Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, repeat the question again, please. I was trying to actually read it. Shame on me. I read a text while you were talking.
Oh, I had accidentally deleted it at the same time. So
Shame on you. You're as bad as me.
I am. See, well, when you click it, there's like the little garbage can right next.
Just ask that person to please, it was a good question. I remember that. I just don't
Yeah.
remember the details. Please
It's,
re-ask the question.
Yes. Okay. So in the meantime, what do you mean by is interval spoilage?
Interval spoilage data. So, one of the ways that we capture data in behavior analysis, they teach us, although I knew this long before I took so here's what you do. In an interval spoilage data collection system, intervals of time are structured in a very precise kind of way. For the sake of this argument, let's take a 15-minute interval spoilage data collection system. So if I have an 8-hour shift that staff are taking data on, I break that 8-hour shift down into 32 15-minute intervals. 8 to 8:15 a.m., 8:16 to 8:30 a.m., 8:31 to 8:45 a.m., etc. And the beauty of an interval spoilage system, which I don't think we use enough, because we're too stuck in the frequency count debacle, is if a behavior occurs during that 15-minute interval, the staff simply put a check in that box. And we say the technical term is the interval is spoiled. So what that means is the behavior occurred at least once, could have occurred more often, but we don't care because the interval has been spoiled. So when we accumulate data like that over time, we can say this behavior has been exhibited based on these amount of intervals being spoiled. Might not be an absolute frequency count, but we have an accurate, reliable, consistent, ongoing measure of how often during those 15-minute intervals that person exhibits the target behavior. The nice thing about that is that it's easier for staff to maintain. You don't have to walk around with the damn clicker. If the behavior occurs at 8:01 a.m. and the interval goes till 8:15, and you take off that interval because it's been spoiled, now you don't have to worry about it for another 15 minutes. So there's a real upside to collecting data on an interval spoilage system. I hope I've articulated exactly what it means and how to do it. If I haven't, email me and I'll try to get even more detail. But I think you get the picture.
Awesome. So what are the data collection methods you find yourself using more often than other methods?
I use a lot of interval spoilage because I don't think you can do frequency counts. The question that's coming back to me now about that, what the person asked, you deleted and I was trying to multitask unsuccessfully. It had to do with she was stopping the frequency count and going to an ABC data collection system. Well, you got to be careful with that because when you go to an antecedent behavior consequence data collection system, you're asking for the staff to give you a lot of narrative. Now, that kind of documentation information is very relevant if you're doing a functional behavior assessment, but it may not be reasonable if the frequency of the behaviors is reasonably high to expect that staff are going to reliably fill out. That's a much more cumbersome way of collecting data than putting a check in a box. I think you'd agree. So again, it depends. Again, all of these questions are great, but I need to know the details. I think I answered the question that we both screwed up on, Marissa. I hope I did.
I think so too. All right. So, do you have any suggestions for maintaining consistent documentation by staff? Often I find that a few months after training, they start to stop documenting again and I have to retrain again.
Yeah, some of the things I talked about, reminders at staff meetings, getting feedback to them, sharing the data, positive and negative, that they're collecting, and how that reflects how the person is doing. Again, what she's describing, I think, is, initially we train people, they get it, they're all gung ho. Hey, I'll take data, no problem. And then a couple of months later, it's like, maybe I will, maybe I won't, I got other priorities. So we've lost that momentum, we've lost that enthusiasm. So a lot of what I find I try to do in this field, like I think a lot of the audience does, is reignite that commitment, reignite that passion, reignite the need, because we all tend to get kind of lazy and distance ourselves from what we might have been doing more aggressively in the beginning. And again, that's feedback, staff meetings, letting them know how they're doing, reinforcing staff for taking accurate, reliable. That's all part of the answer to that individual's question.
Awesome. Let's see here. Do you have any strategies to get overnight staff to ensure data has been collected and graphed?
Yeah, make it part of their job responsibility. So, right now, most third shift staff, what are they supposed to do? Honestly, can we be honest? They're there to help people evacuate in case there's a fire. They might prepare the lunches for the following day when the people go to day programs, since they're starting to go to day programs again. And like I said, they're glorified custodians. They wipe down the tables, they mop the floors, they scrub the toilets. I would argue that should be going on all the time. Why are we treating third shift staff like they're a glorified janitor? I don't get that. My strategy is to train them to look at the data, not necessarily to analyze the data. God forbid, that's our job, and I struggle with that. But just to do those data integrity checks that I talked about, show them where the data is supposed to be, have them immediately notify the manager or some person who has some authority via text, email, or a note they leave when they depart the following morning that certain data is missing that was supposed to be collected that day. And as I said, Mr. Parsimony, if we fix it quickly, I don't have a problem with that, because I think people can remember from one day to the next. I know they don't remember from 1 week to the next. They sure as hell don't remember from 1 month to the next. It's not possible. I got a pretty darn good memory. And if you ask me to remember back to the specifics of behavioral data more than a day or two, I'm going to struggle, just like they will.
Awesome. So I have a question regarding having residential managers start their day by reviewing and looking out for inaccurate information. Our residential managers do not have background in ABA and would not know what to look for as discrepancies.
As I said, that's not their job. I don't want that to be their job. They're not trained to do that. All I want the managers to do in my houses is make sure the damn data is there and that it looks right. As an example, most houses have communication logs. Most houses write shift to shift notes. The manager is the hub of the wheel. The managers, it's no secret that every house in the world that supports people with developmental disabilities, how it runs and how good it is directly proportionate to the manager. How good the manager is. If you got a really good manager that trains their staff and reinforces their staff and holds their staff accountable, you're going to have a damn good house. Not everybody does that. So the manager's job is to make sure the data is there, number one. Yep, all the boxes are checked, great. Number two, to question anything. So in the communication log, Joey assaulted a housemate yesterday. And that's in the communication log, and the manager reads that. But yet I look at the behavioral data. Let's say the person has a daily behavioral contract, something relatively simple. And one of the target behaviors is they treated staff and peers respectfully, and it's checked off, and they earned whatever they're going to earn for that. Okay. But over here, I got a log, and maybe even an incident report saying he punched a housemate in the face. Well, how can that be? How can that? Well, the answer is can't be. It can't be. So the probability is the communication log and the incident report have some credibility, some veracity, and this doesn't. So now you say, okay, there's a disconnect. And the manager's job, in my opinion, is to get on top of the disconnect. Why was the data recorded inaccurately? Not to point fingers, not to get mad at people, not to write people up, but in the spirit of trying to fix it so it doesn't happen again. That's my response there. I don't want them analyzing the data. I don't want, no, it's not a manager's job. But I want them to make damn sure that it's there and that it looks reasonably accurate. And if they've done that, I'm a happy camper.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, hang on one second. I'm just reading through these. Okay, so due to staffing issues, I have one staff member working in a home who is related to the client. This staff member is the only one who reports absolutely no client behaviors or challenges and collects no behavioral data. The client's challenges statistically increase after interaction with the family. The home does not currently have a supervisor to go over reports for accuracy, and due to short staffing, the agency is unwilling to revisit staffing options. Any recommendations or strategies for trying to increase recording validity?
Yes, that's probably someone I would recommend email me. Now, let me go back to the origin of that question. It was more of a comment. They said that the staff person who never has any problems with the individual is a relative of that person, and they work in the residence. Isn't that a conflict of interest? I'm just asking. Sounds like it to me. And maybe it is. Maybe that agency doesn't. I don't like it when, I don't know. I like things to be objective, unbiased, impartial. Maybe I'm just in fantasy land. So I would want to know more about that dynamic, because I think that person said that person never records any behavioral problems. Maybe that's because they have a bias not to write anything negative about the person behaviorally because it's directly related to them. It's a reasonable hypothesis. That's a question that I would encourage that person to email me about, and let's get into some more detail.
Okay. So if the agency will not supply costly reinforcements for staff, what else can be done to provide reinforcement that does not cost money?
The most potent reinforcers in the world are attention, recognition, acknowledgement. Cost nothing. Cost nothing to give those things. Shame on an agency that hides behind the excuse, we don't have any money, so we can't get them the $50 gas cards that Kevin was proposing. I don't care. Put it on your website. Put a sign on their lawn saying that they were the data collection winners of the month. Give them a pizza party. Can you afford that, please? Most of these agencies are multi-million-dollar entities. As a wise old friend of mine said, if money's your only problem, then you don't have a problem. And he was right. It's not about whether you have the money. It's a question about how do you prioritize what you do with it and how you spend it. So an agency that says, I don't believe it, we can't afford to have pizza for the staff at that house because it's going to cost $150 at the end of the month. So you got to come up with something different. In my opinion, an agent is an agency that's likely not vested in change and is likely not invested in changing the way they do things. So you got bigger problems than that. But reinforcement, attention, put that house on the agency's website with an acknowledgement that and mention the staff by name. That didn't cost you anything. Why not do that? And if they won't do that, what's the excuse for not doing that? Because there isn't any. I don't mean to be, I don't know. Sometimes I just come across in a way, I get worried what people think about me. I'm very passionate about this. And I have spent 35 years dealing with a lot of people that make a lot of excuses. And I'm up to here with that nonsense because most of these problems that we're talking about today are fixable. If you have a dedicated, committed agency, including administration and management, that recognizes they have a problem, number one, and is motivated to do something about it, number two. I'm getting off the soapbox on that one. I'll get in trouble. I probably already have.
All right, everybody. So let's see. What can you do if you are a consultant given limited hours and resources to work on all responsibilities, and management of an agency is unable to consistently implement recommendations or requests related to data collection when you're not present?
Well, truth be told, I own my own company and I'm a consultant to 5 or 6 different agencies all at one time. So this person is preaching to the choir on that one. When agencies, here's what I do. Not everybody can do this, and I understand this. When I see problems within an agency, just like she described, which I run into every day, and I'm a consultant, but they pay me fairly well. I'm a consultant, but presumably I have some idea what the hell I'm talking about, and they think I have some value. So what I sometimes will do, sometimes it goes over well, sometimes not so much. When I get really frustrated, data isn't being collected, behavior support plans that I've written aren't being followed, and I know this. I'm even though I'm a consultant, I'm quite aware of what's going on, and I'm sure this person is as well. At some point, we do have limited ability to, but you know what I do when I feel particularly frustrated, which happens a lot? I go in usually to the executive director because I usually deal in my business, I deal with the executive directors. I'm not dealing with lower level management. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I want a direct line of communication to the person in charge. So what I've done on a few occasions is I've gone in when I'm really frustrated and at my wit's end, which I find myself to be quite a bit these days. I'll go into the executive director and I'll explain the situation, and they'll hem and they'll haw and they'll say, yeah, we're doing the best we can. And I'll say to them, why are you paying me? Why are you paying me? And they usually look at me like, what are you talking about? Why am I paying you? Well, I need someone with your experience and your expertise and background. And I'll say to them, but you're not taking my advice. I'm telling you what you have to do. I'm telling you how to fix it, but you're not doing any of it. And you'd be amazed sometimes I even threaten to leave an agency because for me, it's not always about getting paid. It's about, am I making a difference? And if what I'm doing is if what I'm saying to improve the situation for the people that I'm privileged to support and have been for 35 years and continue to be each and every day, I owe it to them to make a difference. So if I've exhausted every opportunity I have, every avenue I have to make a difference, there have been a number of times in my career I've walked away because I've said, I'm not going to take your money because you're not taking my advice. So now I'm not suggesting that everybody will do that, can do that, but it sure makes me feel good when I have, because I don't want to participate in nonsense. I don't want to participate in the facade. That's not what I do. Not then, not now, not ever. So if you're not going to make fundamental necessary changes to provide better supports to the people that are responsible for your agency being in existence and you having a job, then I'm not sure I can be here anymore. How's that for an answer? More than I thought I would give.
Alrighty. So, do you have examples of user-friendly data collection systems for residential group homes with multiple clients, like 6 to 8 in the home? There are likely 3 to 4 staff in the home, and I have tried clickers, but sometimes they have a hard time keeping track of multiple clickers or the right clicker per client. And what options do we have when frequency isn't our focus?
Well, as I said before, when frequency isn't your focus, latency, if it's a response-based behavior you're concerned about, how long is it taking the person to respond? Duration measures, how long is the behavior taking place? Intensity measures, it's a behavior, but it's more relevant on, if someone hits their face like that, and I have an intensity scale of 1 to 10, and that's a 1, I'm not that concerned about it. Maybe I should be, but I'm not. If a person's punching themselves in the side of the head and leaving significant bruising, now I have an intensity of an 8 or a 9. So maybe I want to capture things that way. I don't normally, this person mentioned 6 to 8 people in their question. That's tough. I'm not gonna lie. But here's a thought. If you have 4 people on duty and 8 people living in a house, that sometimes you have to say to a staff person, I've done this, desperate times call for desperate measures. You say to that one staff person, you're responsible for these 2 people, for this shift, for taking data. And you break it up that way. So now you have, instead of 4 being responsible for a collective 8, and it's like everybody's running around wondering what the other person is doing, I've now delineated more direct accountability and responsibility by breaking it up the way I just described. I don't like to do that for lots of reasons that I'm not going to spend the time to get into, but I have done that before and I'll continue to do it if I think that's going to help the situation.
Awesome. So, have you had a lot of buy-in from direct support staff using 15-minute intervals? I find this would be best if funding supported having an additional staff in the home for this purpose, but what if funding doesn't support this?
I'm not sure what funding has to do with 15-minute interval spoilage data. I would argue that that doesn't take any more resources to record data that way. It hasn't in my experience. A staff person knows they're taking documentation every 15 minutes. There's a data sheet that reflects that shift in 15-minute increments. A person engages in a behavior that's identified on that data sheet as soon as possible. And I encourage staff to carry around a little notepad. Just put it back in your pocket, no problem. Prefer they not do it on their phone, because then that's an excuse to have their phone all the time, which is a big problem in the field. I don't see where taking data via an interval spoilage system takes more resources. So maybe I'm missing what that person is trying to communicate, or you're welcome to educate me in an email or a text, and I'll try to conceptualize better what they're talking about. But I don't see interval spoilage data taking any. In fact, I would argue it's less, because once I know that that interval's been spoiled, then the 50.
Hey, Kevin, I think you froze. Okay, everybody. I see that I think Kevin might be having some internet issues. It appears that he's now gone offline, so I believe that there's been a disconnect. So I apologize for the wait. I see that many people are starting to log off, so I am going to send him a message that we will just conclude the Q&A for now. Thank you all for joining us today. As I said earlier, I will have your CEU certificates ready for you tomorrow morning by lunchtime. So just keep that in mind if you need your CEUs. And thank you so much for joining us today. And if you have any questions that Kevin did not answer during the webinar, please feel free to use his website. He's made a great point that he is down to answer your questions. So please feel, oh, actually, hey, Kevin, you're back. Oh, possibly. I'm not quite sure. There seems to be, hey, Kevin, can you hear me?
Now I can. Sorry about that.
It's okay. About half of our audience has left. I'm not sure if you want us to continue to do the Q&A. I kind of just signed off in a way.
Was there a major, was that just my network connection or everybody?
No, it was you. I'm sorry to say.
Oh,
Okay.
I suddenly got a message saying my audio has been lost in my connection. So I just rebooted and reset up. But
yeah.
if people still have questions, I'll stick around. I apologize for that. We've never had a technical problem before. I wanted to blame that on you, Marissa. I don't think that was me. Damn you.
Not
All right.
I
I'll
work.
take responsibility.
Okay, so let's see. So if you're still here, then we'll continue the Q&A. There are just a few questions, so there's literally just a handful more. So
Okay.
let's just continue. So what about ABC continuous? I find this requires less response effort when compared to ABC narrative.
Yeah, that's an option for sure. Again, it's a function of the behavior of the ABC data to capture events over time and frequency based on an ABC model, or is it to provide the substantive narrative information you're seeking to determine the function of the behavior when you're doing an FBA? Good point that person is making, that there is a distinction. I usually use ABC data exclusively when I have low frequency behavior, when I'm confused about my hypothesis about the underlying function of the behavior, or when I'm initially conducting an FBA and I need the narrative information to try to figure out, what the antecedents and what the functions of the behavior are. But that's a valid observation he or she made.
Awesome. So do you have any tips for using BST model for training staff on data collection systems?
BFT,
BST.
BST stands for.
I am not sure. I'm not, Kevin, I'm not certified.
I know, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but if I'm asking the question, you shouldn't be ashamed that I'm asking. There's so
Oh,
many acronyms in BST. What's it?
behavior skills training.
Oh, okay. See, I was overthinking it. Can you read the question again?
I deleted it.
Ah, between my web connection and you're deleting these things, we're really screwing up.
All right. So I think they're just asking your opinion on using BST
Yeah, okay, I'll go along with it. I'm not sure.
in data collection for training personnel.
Yeah, that's fine. I have no problem with it.
Awesome. All right. So at the agency I work at, the house managers don't work in the home, and they more often than not manage multiple homes. Do you have suggestions for getting this data to them? Perhaps the overnight staff?
How does it? Well, I'm flummoxed. I'm perplexed. Believe what I just heard. You have a residential manager that doesn't work in the house. Is this a remote position to do that? And then you're telling me, by the way, please, I'm just reading in. Not only do they not work in the house that they're the manager for, they have more than one house. For disaster. Been there, tried that. I thought back in the day, so here's telling people my incredible stupidity, but I have nothing to hide. Back in the day, when I used to run an agency, I used to think when I had an outstanding manager and I couldn't clone them, although I wanted to, what I would do is give them more than one house. Every single time I did it, even if it was just two houses, inevitably, it was a failure. I didn't understand why at first, because if this person runs such a great house and they're this skilled and they're this adept, why can't they just bring all of those skills and turn this house, which is struggling, into a masterpiece like their other house? And the answer is, we're asking them to do too much. You can't have that kind of laser focus in two residences, I don't believe, that you might be able to have in the one. So I can't even respond to that person's question because I'm struggling with the idea of a manager not being in the home and then having data collection responsibilities when they have no direct day-to-day involvement in the home. That sounds more like an administrative supervisory oversight position. Doesn't sound like that's not what I consider in the classic sense to be a residential manager. So I apologize, I'm having trouble responding to that question because I'm having trouble wrapping my head around it.
Okay. So I work in a school and we have teacher assistants, but they do not have training as RBT. What is the best way to gather more accurate data that is simple to use. Currently, we use frequency, although that is highly unreliable. We also take duration of tantrums and intensity of tantrums.
That's interesting. I mean, first of all, one of my disclaimers is I've had very little to do with school settings. I tend to work with adults in group home settings, although I have worked with a couple of residential schools and educational institutions. It sounds like they're capturing data in 3 separate categories, and she acknowledges that the frequency data is flawed. I'd be curious if she believes the duration and the intensity measure is more accurate or valid. Again, I'm not sure that we should be training or providing formal training. And even the RBT guys, please don't take offense when I say this, but I believe that's 40 hours of training. I mean, it's a good fundamental basic starting point, I guess, but you know, I'm not sure that that training in and of itself would necessarily result in that person being able to ride shotgun on data that was a little bit better. I'd need to know more of the dynamics about the resources that are available to comment further, but usually I try not to respond to questions that involve students or classrooms or schools, because quite honestly, that's not my area of expertise. There are people that know far more about that than I do.
All right, so this is the last question. Do you find that DSPs struggle with knowing how to take narrative ABC data?
Oh God, yes. Oh yeah. When I part of my training is how many times I know this person is out there right now. They're about to start shaking their head yes, because they're going to totally relate to what I'm about to say. How many times do I see ABC data collected by staff with marginal training that the antecedent part, right, says there was no identifiable antecedent? That's what they write in there. And I go, what the hell are you talking about? I didn't ask you to identify what it was. The antecedent is the environment, whether or not you asked the person to do something, the location, who was in proximity, staff or peers. The antecedent isn't the reason why the person did it. You don't know that, and I don't either. That's why we're collecting data to try to figure that out. The antecedent is just describing the conditions that existed before the ABC, the behavior occurred. So, yes, getting staff to fill out ABC data in a comprehensive, reliable, unbiased, objective manner is an ongoing struggle. So I share that with you.
Sorry about that. I had some trouble unmuting. So, all right, everybody, that was the last of the Q&A that we had for today. Kevin, I just wanted to thank you again for doing this. And you guys already heard me say all this, but thank you all for joining us. And I will have your CEU instructions for you tomorrow. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I think that's all I have to say for now. If you didn't already, please go grab a seat for sessions 5 and 6 of this series next month and in August. And that's all I got to say. So thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Marissa. I'm sorry for that technical glitch, but there's nothing I could do about it.
Also, please, it happens all the time. All
And
right, everybody.
it's never happened before, and I can't even say it'll never happen again because it could. But I hope
No.
it doesn't.
All right, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Marissa.